In June 1944, the beaches of Normandy shook under the weight of the Allied D-Day landings. Amid the smoke and chaos, Nazi soldiers were stunned to see an unfamiliar wave of vehicles pouring inland. These weren't tanks or heavy self-propelled guns. They were American-style military trucks that looked more like civilian transports, with open cargo beds and plain cabins, almost entirely lacking weapons or armor. Many freshly captured German prisoners sat in stunned silence on the wooden benches of a US truck, wondering whether this was truly a combat vehicle or just some absurd non-military delivery truck. Doubt crept in. The US Army sends unarmed trucks to the front lines. What could these possibly do in a real battle? Few could have predicted that those simple pickup-style trucks would turn out to be the hidden force behind the Allies' rapid advance. From mocking laughter in the early days to stunned silence during the retreat. The story of how German soldiers came to see these seemingly fragile vehicles in a new light reveals just how indispensable they were to the final victory. Right from the opening days of the Normandy campaign, as the Allied steel tide crashed onto the beaches of France, many German units were forced to lay down their arms under overwhelming pressure. But their journey into captivity began with a scene as ironic as it was unfamiliar, being transported to the rear by vehicles they had never seen on a European battlefield. American military trucks so plain and unassuming, they were almost hard to believe. Typically, after each battle, American troops gathered up the prisoners, organized them into groups, and loaded them into the beds of GMC CCKW-2, 5-ton trucks, the agile 6X, 6 transport vehicles, affectionately nicknamed Jimmy by US soldiers. These trucks had no gun turrets, no thick armor plating. Most were little more than steel frames with wooden cargo beds, looking more like farm trucks than anything built for war. And yet now, they served as the transport for men of an army that once stormed across half of Europe. The sight was as strange as it was bitter. Rows of German prisoners sat packed tightly in the truck beds, clutching their helmets, staring blankly ahead in heavy silence. Up front, a few American GIs perched casually on the fenders, M1 rifles in hand, eyes never leaving the group behind. All of it contained within a truck with no armor, no mounted machine guns, a scene that left many German soldiers silently wondering, is this really a military vehicle? To them, war meant armored monsters, half-tracks with machine guns, brute force clad in steel. But here was something else entirely, a bare-bones truck that seemed like it had no place in combat. And yet they had just watched it roll steadily through fire and smoke, carrying the Allied war machine ever closer to the heart of Germany. At first, many German prisoners couldn't help but whisper among themselves about the strange trucks carrying them away from the front lines. These vehicles looked nothing like what they considered military transport. There was no armor, no weapons, and the design resembled the kind of trucks used to haul crops from the fields. Some even joked that if you took off the army plates, these trucks could drive through any village and no one would bat an eye. A few of the prisoners, especially those who had served in logistics, quickly recognized them as Dodge WC or GMC models, standard field vehicles of the US Army. They recalled that the German military had its own trucks too, like the 3-ton Opel Blitz, but those were mostly used for rear area supply runs. On the battlefield, German infantry still marched on foot or moved in horse-drawn wagons. When troops needed to be transported, they relied on half-track armored vehicles, like the SD KFZ 251, and everything that could carry men also carried machine guns. The fighting was too brutal, too unforgiving, for anything unarmed to survive. And yet, there they were, American trucks, without armor, without guns, calmly rolling forward in broad daylight, all the way to the front lines. It defied every German instinct about how to survive in war. It felt reckless, if not outright foolish. Many prisoners couldn't hide their confusion and quiet disbelief. Was the US military really sending trucks like these into battle? In the middle of flying bullets, how could they possibly stay intact? But surprise sometimes came with a touch of silent dread. Franz G., a German soldier captured after a firefight near Carentan, recalled, "We were crammed into the back of an American truck in full daylight, and there wasn't a single machine gun covering us." In the past, I would have thought this was suicide, but strangely, above our heads that day, there were only American planes. That was the new reality German soldiers had to face after D-Day. The skies no longer belonged to them. Allied aircraft, like the P-47 Thunderbolt and P-51 Mustang, ruled the air, sweeping the skies clean of German presence. Any German unit moving in daylight had to be constantly on edge, listening for the distant whine of engines above. Veterans later recalled how every march meant scanning for roadside ditches, bushes, or drainage canals, anything they could dive into the moment they heard a plane approaching. In contrast, the American truck convoys kept rolling as if nothing could touch them. No air raids, no daylight ambushes. They moved freely, almost as if the battlefield itself posed no threat. The sight left many German prisoners not just surprised, but quietly envious, and perhaps even doubtful. What they were witnessing seemed to be a different kind of war, one where mobility and control of the skies mattered more than a single cannon ever could. One of the clearest moments of realization came just 3 days after the landings. Near the town of Sainte-Mère-Église, a retreating group of German soldiers spotted a column of American trucks heading their way. They quickly set up a machine gun, ready to ambush. To their eyes, the light trucks at the front looked fragile, too easy to destroy. Franz Goltz, a 19-year-old private at the time, recalled that his group opened fire first, aiming straight at the lead vehicles. But within minutes, everything turned upside down. A Sherman tank roared up from the rear of the column and shattered the ambush. American infantry spilled out from the trucks behind and quickly moved to encircle. Trapped in an open field with no way out, Goltz and his comrades had no choice but to surrender. He later remembered, "We thought it was just a few transport trucks traveling alone, but behind them was an entire fighting force, tanks, infantry, even planes overhead. That wasn't a convoy. It was a war machine moving in sync." That story was just one of countless times German troops clashed with the American approach to combined arms warfare, where even unarmed trucks played a vital role. Unlike the German mindset, which armed every vehicle for fear of isolation, the Americans trusted in coordination. They relied on support fire from tanks, infantry, and aircraft working in harmony. Goltz and many other prisoners would later admit they had completely misjudged the Americans. The trucks they once mocked as rolling tin cans turned out to be the backbone of the Allied war effort, a machine that didn't need armor to be deadly. After those early encounters, American trucks were no longer a mystery to German prisoners. Instead, they became a lingering question that kept coming back. Why did the US Army use vehicles that didn't even look like they belonged on a battlefield? That question slowly revealed its answer, not through speculation, but through first-hand experience, through the sheer difference between two visions of war. To the German soldier's mind, war meant massive engines of destruction, roaring Tiger tanks, earth-shattering 88mm, flak guns, and hulking self-propelled artillery that moved like armored fortresses. Their army wielded firepower no one could dismiss. But behind all that steel, their supply system was worryingly fragile. Although the Germans had the Opel Blitz truck, half-tracks, and other mechanized vehicles, they existed in modest numbers and were typically reserved for armored divisions or senior officers. Most German infantry, even on the Western Front, still moved on foot, dragging crude wooden carts or marching alongside horse-drawn wagons. Incredibly, even by 1944, the Wehrmacht was still using over 2.8 million horses to haul supplies across its fronts, a figure that left many American soldiers stunned when they heard it later. Due to this chronic shortage of vehicles, the Germans were forced to militarize anything with wheels. Civilian trucks were refitted with machine guns, and any troop transport needed to be armed for self-defense. Daylight movement was discouraged, not only due to ambushes, but also because the skies no longer belonged to them. Each journey was a gamble with fate. Only when they looked across the battlefield did they truly realize they were fighting a different kind of enemy. The Americans didn't just bring weapons. They brought an entirely new philosophy of warfare. They didn't need every truck to carry a gun or armor plating. Instead, they built a vast logistical machine where every gear from jeeps to cargo trucks had a defined role. backed by a powerful combined arms system that protected the whole. The biggest difference was scale. The GMC 2.5-ton truck alone, nicknamed the Deuce and a Half, saw over 570,000 units produced during the war. In total, the US manufactured more than 800,000 of these standard military trucks. Add to that hundreds of thousands of Jeeps, over 337,000 Dodge WC utility trucks, and countless specialized vehicles, and it becomes clear. The United States brought motorization down to the level of the infantry squad, something the German army could only dream of. And America didn't keep it all to itself. Under the Lend-Lease program, the US supplied the Soviet Union with nearly 400,000 trucks. To German prisoners, that fact was both shocking and bitter. Their enemies on both fronts were rolling forward on American wheels. These weren't just statistics buried in supply reports. They played out vividly across the fields of Normandy. German tanks were formidable, but without fuel, ammunition, or spare parts, they became little more than steel carcasses rusting in the open. In contrast, American Sherman tanks, while outmatched in armor, were always shadowed by convoys of supply trucks. From the rear came drums of fuel, crates of shells, and even hot meals, delivered with the consistency of blood flowing through veins, keeping the Allied war machine alive and advancing. At that point, German prisoners of war did not need logistics reports to understand the scale of disparity. They saw it with their own eyes, endless convoys of American trucks pouring into the battlefield from every direction. And they felt it too. Every time the Americans launched a breakthrough, it was not just infantry rushing forward. An entire logistical system surged behind them. As German units scrambled to retreat and reorganize, they often found themselves cut off, not by tanks, but by American trucks and jeeps packed with infantry that had already raced ahead. Sitting in the back of one such truck, a captured German officer muttered bitterly, "We marched through the mud. They drove through the war." For many prisoners, that was not just a bitter observation. It was a verdict on the outdated military doctrine they had once believed to be invincible. The American trucks that German soldiers once scoffed at, civilian vehicles with no weapons, soon proved their worth, not with boasts, but through action on the battlefield. After breaking through the hedgerows of Normandy in late July 1944, the Allies opened the gates to a rapid pursuit across France. But for an army of hundreds of thousands to surge eastward like thunder, it needed something just as vital as guns: logistics. At the time, France's railways lay in ruins, much of it destroyed by Allied bombers in the lead-up to D-Day. Major ports were still either in enemy hands or unusable. That left only one option: the roads. And it was on those roads that the seemingly harmless American trucks began to show their true might. Within just days, the US military established a logistical system with no precedent: the Red Ball Express. More than 6,000 trucks of all types were mobilized and organized into hundreds of convoys, operating under strict rules: non-stop driving, no delays, no stops unless the vehicle was beyond repair. The Red Ball routes were one-way loops, reserved solely for supply transport. Every intersection had military police to manage traffic and ensure that the flow of trucks never stopped. German prisoners, being transported away from the front, often passed these convoys heading in the opposite direction. Sitting silently in the backs of American trucks, they watched lines of US vehicles roar past, engines growling, horns blaring, wheels pounding the road. One former German soldier recalled, "We were being taken back toward the coast." Coming from the other direction were hundreds, thousands of American trucks, big ones, small ones, Jeeps, GMCs, Dodges, all driving non-stop. I had never seen so many vehicles in my life. It was not just a feeling, the numbers backed it up. At its peak, the Red Ball Express saw nearly 6,000 trucks moving every day, delivering over 12,000 tons of supplies, ammunition, fuel, food, straight to the advancing front. On the 29th of August, 1944, one report logged 5,958 trucks operating in a single 24-hour period, hauling 12,342 tons of cargo. To German soldiers, accustomed to horse-drawn wagons and trickle supply lines, those figures were beyond belief, like something out of a fantasy. But the Red Ball Express was more than just a mindless stream of vehicles. It knew how to protect itself. At first, the Luftwaffe still managed to launch occasional surprise attacks, hoping to sever the Allied supply lines. But German pilots quickly learned that American trucks were not the easy prey they had expected. Many had M2 Browning, 50 caliber machine guns mounted right on the roof of the cab. When enemy aircraft swooped in, American drivers and gunners didn't run. They climbed up and returned fire. In one instance, a group of truck drivers reportedly worked together to shoot down an FW-190 right over the skies of France. No one had expected that kind of retaliation from what were once seen as defenseless support vehicles. On the ground, German troops tried every tactic to sabotage the convoy's landmines, steel wire traps, roadblocks set up under the cover of night. But the Americans had countermeasures for everything. Jeeps at the front of each convoy were fitted with tall V-shaped steel prongs to deflect wire strung across the road. Combat engineers accompanied the convoys, ready to clear mines or obstacles at a moment's notice. And if a truck broke down, another would immediately pull it aside so the line could keep moving. Stopping was not an option. Delays were unacceptable. That was the lifeblood rule of the Red Ball Express, followed with military precision. This spirit, the unbreakable resolve to get supplies to the front no matter the cost, earned the silent admiration of many German prisoners, even in defeat. The more they watched, the more they realized a bitter truth. The Americans were winning not just with firepower, but with how they managed everything behind the front. While German troops often retreated hungry, demoralized, and exhausted, American drivers, though tired themselves, were receiving hot coffee and free donuts at rest stations run by the Red Cross. Many prisoners recalled scenes that left them stunned. American soldiers, sometimes black soldiers, sitting casually beside bullet-riddled trucks, sipping coffee as if war had not touched them. For any Wehrmacht soldier, that level of comfort in the middle of combat was unimaginable. One American driver once said he tied his C-ration can to the truck's engine block so it could heat up while he drove. The story made German soldiers chuckle, but they also couldn't help but respect it. The Americans were practical, relaxed, and surprisingly inventive. In the end, it was those very trucks, once mocked as firewood haulers, that turned into the silent weapon of victory. Without firing a shot or wearing armor, they kept rolling forward, carrying an army in their wake. And for many German soldiers, it was the first time they realized that sometimes defeat doesn't come from the enemy's gun, but from the truck rolling steadily behind them. It was not just the large GMC trucks that played a crucial role in the American war machine. Even smaller and seemingly fragile vehicles, like the Dodge WC 3/4 ton, quickly proved they were just as indispensable on the battlefield. At first, many German soldiers scoffed at these vehicles. They looked light, thin-skinned, and lacked heavy weapons, not unlike farm trucks meandering across country roads. Some prisoners even joked that they looked like toy cars when they saw American troops using them at the front lines. But that impression did not last. After just a few battles in the woods or in bombed-out urban areas, they quickly realized something else was at play. The Dodge WC, along with the compact Willys MB Jeep, became the eyes and fast-moving feet of the U.S. Army. These vehicles darted through terrain that German vehicles could not even approach, from slippery hillsides to forest trails or rubble-strewn streets in ruined cities. On board were scouts, signal teams, medics, or mobile mortar squads, all rushing into advanced positions. A small Dodge could tow a light cannon, serve as a radio post, or reach wounded soldiers in places where larger vehicles were completely useless. That kind of nimble mobility, though seemingly simple, was exactly what the German army increasingly lacked in the final stages of the war. But the value of these lightweight vehicles went beyond tactics. As winter set in and Europe was blanketed in snow at the end of 1944, American trucks stepped into an even more vital role during the last major German offensive. In the Battle of the Ardennes, when German forces launched a massive surprise counterattack through the forest, many Allied units were surrounded, cut off, or forced into chaotic retreats. In that moment, it was the very same field trucks once mocked by German troops that became lifelines. In just a few freezing nights, hundreds of American trucks raced from the rear to deliver reinforcements into the Ardennes. Elite units like the 82nd and 101st Airborne Divisions, scattered and spread thin, were rushed onto trucks and driven through the night to halt the German advance in time. For many German prisoners, that was the moment of realization. The Americans could move an entire corps on trucks alone. One German general later admitted frankly that without such extraordinary mobility, the offensive might have succeeded, or at the very least, inflicted far heavier losses on the Allies. And then, when German forces tried to ambush Allied supply routes, they encountered another surprise. The American truck convoys were no longer unarmed. The US began deploying armed escort vehicles with significantly more firepower. A prime example was the M16 half-track, a tracked vehicle equipped with a quad mount of 12.7mm anti-aircraft machine guns that often accompanied large truck convoys. Whenever an ambush occurred, these guns could sweep through enemy infantry formations or effectively counter low-flying aircraft. One German prisoner later recalled seeing a US truck pulling a trailer mounted with a 90mm anti-aircraft cannon, racing through a stretch of thick mud, a sight that defied the limits of what he thought machines could do at the time. Gradually, a realization took root in the minds of many Germans. Americans could mount anything onto a truck: troops, fuel, rations, howitzers, or anti-aircraft guns, as long as it served a tactical purpose. To them, the truck was more than just a vehicle. It was a philosophy of war built on absolute mobility, where flexibility mattered more than firepower, and speed could alter the course of a battle. And above all, they did it not with a handful of trucks, but with an army of wheels that never stopped turning. In the beginning, the image of American trucks only drew ridicule from German soldiers. With their plain wooden frames, lacking guns or armor, they looked no different from farm haulers. Some called them farmer trucks. Others laughed, saying they resembled moving toys. For an army hardened alongside Tiger tanks and hulking self-propelled guns, those wooden crates on wheels hardly seemed threatening. But the battlefield has a way of testing truth with speed, ammunition, and sweat. And day by day, as front lines collapsed and retreat turned into rout, those same confident soldiers began to notice what they had overlooked in their entire military calculus. The farther they retreated, the more isolated they became in the shattered lines, the more they saw American trucks everywhere. They carried troops, delivered fuel, hauled artillery shells and food, even evacuated the wounded back to the rear. Quiet and unassuming, their consistent presence was what kept the Allied war machine running smoothly, without pause. One German captain, captured in the Falaise pocket, where tens of thousands of German soldiers were killed or forced to surrender, put it bluntly, "We did not lack guns. But the enemy had too much fuel and too many trucks." His words were not an excuse. They were a conclusion drawn after every means of resistance had been crushed by mobility and momentum. Even those directing the war understood this truth. Colonel John S.D. Eisenhower, son of Supreme Allied Commander Eisenhower, once wrote, "The rapid advance across France could not have been achieved without the drivers of the Red Ball Express." When someone at the very top of Allied command says that trucks are no longer just support units, they are the backbone, the driving force that allowed the massive Allied army to surge across the continent like a tidal wave. For German prisoners of war, the longer they marched in captivity, the more deeply they felt it. Many recalled a moment they would never forget. Standing inside a POW camp on American soil, they watched a train roll past, carrying tanks, aircraft, and freshly built trucks. One man turned to his friend and quietly said, "We've lost the war." No further explanation was needed. Just witnessing the relentless, limitless output of American industry, they understood that the war was being decided not only on the battlefield, but also behind the factory gates, where supply lines never stopped moving. In Europe, that reality appeared every day. American trucks roared through shattered towns in endless convoys. They carried artillery, troops, and the hope of an entire Allied force. One former German soldier recalled, When I saw those convoys of trucks rushing past, packed with soldiers and ammunition, I knew the battle was over. We had only our willpower left. They had an entire supply machine at their backs. What began as contempt had slowly faded into silence, then observation, and eventually respect. Many prisoners were later sent to work on farms in the United States. There, they saw with their own eyes what once seemed like propaganda but now stood as undeniable truth. From wheat fields to granaries, from factories to village roads, Americans used machines for everything. They learned to drive tractors, operate trucks. They saw farms with 2 or 3 motor vehicles, each something even German officers had never received. And only then did many finally understand. When a nation mechanizes every aspect of life, from food production to warfare, it doesn't need a lightning strike to win, it just needs time. America did not need to claim victory with thunderous blows. They achieved it with the steady hum of engines, with logistics that ran like clockwork, with trucks that moved day and night without needing slogans or speeches. Just a straight road and a line of vehicles that never stopped moving. This was not a victory of weapons, it was a victory of wheels. Gradually, as the dust of battle settled and the glow of mighty war machines faded, what lingered in the minds of many German prisoners was not the shock of combat, but a deeper realization that modern warfare was not won solely at the front lines. What happened behind the battlefield quietly, steadily, and with precision was what ultimately decided the outcome. During their retreat across France, through roads increasingly severed and scattered, they began to see who truly held the advantage. It was not the side with the bigger guns, nor the side with the heavier tanks. It was the side that could keep every cannon, every tank, every infantry platoon alive with a constant, unbroken stream of supplies. And so, those humble American trucks, unarmored, unarmed, unadorned, became the silent pillars of Allied victory. They were everywhere, behind the trenches, in muddy back roads, at transfer points, and right alongside units on the verge of collapse. They did not need to roar to prove their value, for their timely, dependable presence was enough to change the very rhythm of the war. From mockery came doubt, and from doubt came reluctant respect. Every time the American army arrived, it was not just soldiers and tanks. It was always followed by an endless convoy of trucks, carrying fuel, food, reinforcements, and resolve. That was what wore the Germans down, disoriented them, drained them, and shattered their ability to regroup or counterattack effectively. One former German officer, reflecting years later, put it bitterly. "We had good guns, but the Americans had endless steel convoys running non-stop between the front and the rear. That is what defeated us." It was no longer a comment about a vehicle. It was a recognition of an entire way of making war, where efficiency, organization, and operational momentum became weapons just as potent as firepower or manpower. For many German POWs, the most enduring image was not a single battle but something they saw constantly during their long retreat: American trucks, running in endless lines, stretching from one horizon to the other. Each one was a link in a chain that could not be broken, and if the thunder of artillery was the roar of war, then the rumble of truck engines was its steady heartbeat, persistent, tireless, and ultimately unstoppable. Wars end. Guns fall silent. But in the memories of those who once stood against America, what echoes the loudest is not the blasts of battle, but the steady hum of engines rolling forward without pause, carrying with them a war machine that could not be turned back.